without limits or judgment. A place for you and people like you to tell your most effed up stories.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our special Halloween edition of Effed Up Stories. I am your host, Will Pender.
And I am your co-host, Ryan Sharp.
And tonight, we have a very Halloween-centric topic. We are going to do it on Ouija boards, and in particular, I'm going to focus, I think, mostly on the Zozo phenomenon. For those who haven't heard of that before, you're in for a treat. No pun intended. But before we get into that, I would just like to remind everybody that if you have any effed up stories of your own on the paranormal or pictures or video, feel free to submit that to us at our official website. That's effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. And it will most likely end up on the website, but possibly in a podcast as well. Now, on to the topic of Ouija boards. There are a couple of reasons why we decided to do this. One of the major reasons, I think, is that a lot of people are planning on using a Ouija board for this Halloween, it being the season and all. And what I've discovered is that a lot of people who are, casual, they're not really into it, but they like to jump in on this kind of thing at parties.
Dabblers. They
run into a very interesting phenomenon, and of course, to which I'm referring is the Zozo phenomenon. So as I started to research the Ouija boards, this Zozo phenomenon came up repeatedly. Initially I was just looking for really interesting stories. I mean, we've even had guests on our show whose story, the origin can be traced back to a Ouija board. So, I mean, it's very common. But in this case, and I'm sure I've read of it before, but I didn't realize how deep it went. So the Zozo phenomenon, basically what it is that there's thousands, in fact, hundreds of thousands of people who have used Ouija boards to make contact with a loved one or an entity. But what they end up finding is they come in contact with this entity known as Zozo. There's a couple different ways that it's spelled, or it spells its name for you. There's the Zado, there's Zado, S-O. Sometimes it's just constantly Zado. Just the planchette just keeps going back between them constantly. Or sometimes even Oz, O-Z, but it is the same entity. In either case,
sometimes the letter S is interchangeable with Z.
Yes, well, that's what I meant. A lot of times you'll see Z-O-S-O, right?
Yes.
And in any case, this entity, when you first make contact with it, it does usually claim to be a loved one, or for that matter, it's kind of friendly and playful in the beginning. But before before it's over, this thing always turns very malevolent. In fact, when people usually make contact with this entity, it's usually, how shall I put this? They'll make contact with it, and then every time they go at the Ouija board, it seems that's all they can contact. It's like that's the only one that ever answers anymore. It's like it attaches itself. And as I said, I mean, this entity is associated with murder, suicide, all kinds of different things, but is a very common and probably the most common entity that most people have shared the experience of contacting. It always seems to know things that it shouldn't. It's very accurate with its information, and it unfortunately tends to attach itself to its victims long after the session is ended.
And the accuracy, I guess, is one of the chief reasons why people, when they sit down and they're trying to contact, a deceased relative, and um, they make some kind of connection with something or someone, and they believe it is said family member because the information is generally pretty accurate.
Yeah, in fact, it can, like, I mean, I've read many, many stories where people could, write something on a piece of paper and put it in their pocket and ask it, what did I write on this piece of paper? And it would actually accurately say what it is. So that's the light side of this stuff, but it actually gets pretty dark. And I mean, and they are the stories that I, purposely sought out when I decided to research into this. So, in particular, Zozo is attracted with two people, I should say, who are suicidal, who have depression, have mental disorders, or, for a lack of better words, fragile. He's particularly drawn to females. Actually, he shows a strong sexual interest in some females, and that's there's some stories that I'll get into with that. But the most interesting thing about this, I guess, is that it's so common that people, right back to the I think it was 1806. It was the 1800s anyway. The first story of Zozo, and like it's actually hard to find information on this because it was from a French dictionary, or not a dictionary. Not a dictionary, but I can't remember what it was, especially because it is really hard to pronounce.
An almanac?
I'm not sure, but it ends in like infernal or infernal, but however the hell you'd say that in French with a French accent.
Yeah, sure. I guess, one of the things that we should touch on for our listeners here, is that while we're sitting here talking about this, I actually have a Ouija board set up in front of me here. I'm staying very engaged in the conversation, obviously, but at the same time, I am trying to divide my attention between the conversation at hand, and um, I'm gonna do my best during this podcast to actively try to communicate with something through the Ouija board. Unfortunately, because of some technical problems, I'm not able to record the video of the session. However, if there's anything of note, I'll be sure to pipe up and let everybody know. So yeah, sorry. Please continue.
Actually, on that note, Ryan, for everybody else out there listening, this is something that we'd like to dive into further in a further episode. If you guys would like to, maybe we could figure out some way that we can go into a live chat room or something like that, and do a podcast with the Ouija board going, and maybe we can all hear your thoughts while we're doing that and see if we can get something to happen. So back into the topic of Ouija boards and Zozo. So I mean, there's a couple trait characteristics that happens when people make contact, besides the fact that it spells its name. It often makes figure eights with the planchette or circles. It also might count down from 10, which is actually it's kind of creepy when you think about it. Zozo, for those of you wondering where it actually, the name comes from, I did mention about how it was first mentioned in that French, I don't know, the French book of whatever it was, where apparently a young girl got possessed. But the word Zozo, and in this case it's spelled Zado, S-O, allegedly comes from, now everybody's heard of the three-headed demon dog who guards the gates of hell named Cerberus. Well, apparently he has a tattoo and it is Zozo. Other theories are that it's a nickname for the demon Pizzazu or even the Jinn. I've even read so far back as that a long time ago in certain cultures, the letter Zad wasn't even official. It was like the mirror of S, and it was meant to be the evil version of S. But again, like this
Well,
is...
apparently at one point in England, there was a actual campaign by certain individuals to abolish the official use of the letter Z.
Yep, and I've actually come across some of that stuff myself. So what I want to do, I want to start off with a story. Now, Ouija boards being as popular as they are, it's not hard to find stories, but it is hard to find stories that are, that I guess would please a jaded person like myself. So I did manage to find a couple stories. So the first one I want to start with is one where someone actually dies. And I think that is really one of the ultimate, the ultimate tragedies that, on one hand, it thrills us, on the other hand, it scares us. But it is, when we look for these stories, we want something that scares us. I mean, that's part of what makes the paranormal fun. It's sad, but it's true. So in this story, it's about a woman named Bonnie. She grew up in Massachusetts. She was really close with her two younger sisters, and they were all interested in the strange and unknown things, not unlike myself and Ryan, and of course everybody that listens to this channel. So anyway, once they were in high school, they started hearing about Ouija boards, and they decided to go out and get one. Well, the two of them would use it, while the third one, I did say three sisters, right? Yeah, Bonnie and two younger sisters, that's right. Two of them would use it, while the third one would sit there with a note and pen, and she would document like what was happening on the paper. Well, they used this thing for weeks, and they were getting the typical spirits telling them about their family, personal details, and then they noticed that every time they used it, they made contact with the same spirit. And of course, I'm referring to Zozo. The spirit, of course, was very nasty with them. It even went as far, it told them it was the devil, right? But I mean, it always spelled its name as Zozo. Anyway, at some point, one of the girl's best friends had heard that, they were playing with this Ouija board, and, this particular friend had lost her sister in a van accident. And so, she wanted to know if she could come over and hopefully make contact with her dead sister using this Ouija board. So, they all agreed, and, one night she comes over, and that's what they set out to do. So when they made contact with what they assumed was her sister, the friend that was over talking to her sister, she was really emotional. She was telling her dead sister how much she loved her and missed her, and said that, she didn't want to live anymore. I mean, that's how miserable she was without her. And all she wanted to do was be reunited with her. Well, 2 weeks later, she died. But she died in a van accident exactly the same way as her dead sister. Now, that's pretty uncanny. I mean, you die, fine, but I mean, the fact that she died, it wasn't just a car accident, it was a van accident, just like her sister.
Just the numbers, the statistical unlikelihood of something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it was, it's just really bizarre. And, and what you'll find in a lot of these cases with Ouija boards, well, for one thing, everybody gets it because it's going to be fun, it's going to be exciting, it's going to be thrilling. But every story that you read, they're all negative. And it's kind of funny to say, but for us who's looking for that thrill without actually having to do it, without actually having to use one, we're looking for as bad as it gets. And I mean, Ouija boards oftentimes completely ruin people's lives. I mean, it's not like they use it once and it's gone. It's once they invite it. I mean, I've even read a site that went into great detail about how to end the session properly. Because if you don't, the session technically is not ended, and whatever you called through is probably still there with you. But anyway, I'm gonna jump ahead to the next story because there are some important aspects that we're gonna go over to do with Ouija boards in general. But this next story is actually pretty popular. When I was looking this up, I found this on a number of different sites, but it shares a common element with a lot of stories that I've read where people have had really bad experiences, and that is that the victim telling the story advocates to stay away from them. They're like very, very upfront and like make a point of going around and spreading that people should stay away from them. And I know just by saying that, I'm pushing each one of you to use one because that's just the way this thing goes. Everybody here
don't press the red button.
Yeah, and everybody pushes the red button. And you know what? I'm no different. And if it wasn't for certain elements, I would have one right here myself. In fact, I do want to pick one up soon. So perhaps me and Ryan will have two going at the same time. But anyway, I'm going to jump to this next story, and this is from a man named Darren. So Darren is from Tulsa, Oklahoma. His experience has led him to, like I just said, he's gone on record warning that Ouija boards are not a toy. But that is what we know them as. I mean, Parker Brothers sold Ouija boards as toys targeted to children. But anyway, I digress. They're dangerous, and that's his message. That's most people who's had experiences with them, that's their message. So as this story goes, Darren often used his Ouija board, and he seemed to keep contacting the same spirit. Again, we have this pattern. In this case, it was just like before. He was contacting Zozo. So Zozo, and it makes you wonder why anyone would want to use this anymore, but like so many before him, Zozo would threaten and cuss him out. Eventually, it started to say that it wanted to possess his girlfriends, and it wanted to bring them, quote unquote, to paradise. Now, if you look up the history with Zozo, you'll see this mentioned in many, many stories, is that he wants to bring the girl to paradise. And every time somebody asks him what paradise is, he always spells out hell. So paradise is always hell with Zozo. So now that's an important note, just because that's where he wants to take these women, and he often asks the women. I've never read a story where he wants to take the man to paradise. Anyway, Darren, like everybody else, asked him where paradise was, and it spelled out hell. So fast forward a little bit, and Darren was recording music. He was starting to do some kind of musical project. And while he was doing this, he used his Ouija board, and he asked Zozo what he should name his band. To which it replied, Iron Tongue. And Darren thought it sounded pretty cool. It had a nice ring to it or whatever. Until a little later, when he discovered that his daughter's tongue had swollen up, and as he described, it was rock hard, to the point that it had actually distorted her face and was grotesquely hanging out of her mouth. She was suffocating, which resulted in a frantic trip to the hospital, where Darren and his girlfriend had to take turns, sitting at his daughter's bedside waiting for her to recover. It never said in the story whether this was an infection or allergic reaction. But I mean, just based on the fact that he was using a Ouija board, it says Iron Tongue, and then shortly after, his daughter's tongue balloons out of her mouth into like a rock hard, a rock hard way. I mean, that's pretty eerie, right? Another time, Darren said to his girlfriend, who wasn't herself at the time. He explained it as she kind of was breaking down into almost a zombified version of herself. And to quote his words, he said that she was in a trance-like state. She was basically hollow. And Zozo had told him that he was going to possess his girlfriend and he was going to eat her soul. So I don't know if it's related or not, but Darren had come into the bathroom around this time to find his daughter in the tub, and she was actually in the process of sinking under the water, and the water was overflowing onto the floor everywhere. So, I mean, I guess panicked, he scooped her out, but the next day she had to be hospitalized for 2 weeks due to an internal infection, as the doctors tried to diagnose actually what had caused it. She almost died, and in the words of the girlfriend, she only left her alone for a second. I know that's what every mother says when they leave their kid and something bad happens, but I wonder, is this the case of a trance-like state or possession, that the girlfriend was hypnotized or something during the time that this was happening? It could be missing time for all we know, but I don't know. But the surrounding elements would suggest the possibility, especially that she was not herself around this time, and she was like in a zombified-like state. It's also interesting to note here that I had read other research on the Zozo phenomenon that had said that Zozo would always try to kill the firstborn child, and I've read that on many different sites, so I just wonder if there's any merit to that. But anyway, back to Darren's case. He had several guests stay with him after his initial contact with Zozo, and they would report hearing creepy voices coming from inside the walls, poltergeist activity with household objects being thrown around, and more related to demonic activity, there would allegedly be spiders that would seemingly come out of nowhere. It would just be kind of crawling all over the walls. There's all this kind of a mishmash of paranormal things happening. Even down to electronic disturbances with the lights and doors opening and closing, locking and unlocking. Darren even spoke of waking up to the sensation of being choked. Another thing that we all, attribute to demonic activity is very common. He said whatever it was, it wouldn't release its grip for 30 seconds. And this also happened to his girlfriend, I believe he said the next night. Interestingly enough, for those of you who are religious, Darren said he was having a conversation with his brother about the possibility of a family curse. And when he was talking about this, he said that something to the effect of using the Lord's name to get rid of it. And as soon as he said it, a thunderous boom struck loud enough to draw the neighbors over to question. So, he's just in his house. He's talking about, a family curse, and he uses, some kind of thought logic of using the Lord's name to drive it out. And bang, all of a sudden, this is loud enough to draw his neighbors over. So that's pretty spectacular.
It's interesting because, just yesterday, I watched a program that detailed the story of a family who had moved into a house with apparently with demons living in the basement. Like the former inhabitants were occultists, and that was the event that that was the thing that happened that kind of kicked off the worst of what they experienced. Was like this. Right before the worst of the worst that happened, there was this like an explosion in their basement, and it was like the floor actually rose up. It was so violent. It was an interesting parallel that with the driving out, you get that thunderous clap, and and it's something that's been detailed in many other demon cases as well. This sudden whomp of force and sound.
I've actually heard I remember this. I mean, you saying that kind of triggered the memory for me. But when I was younger, and I mean really young, I was like 7 or 8. I mean, even as a kid, I was into this stuff. And a kid who lived on my street, and he's a couple years older than me, and his brother was a couple years older than him, and he had, this some kind of satanic book, and I mean, which was really cool to people like me as a kid because it was so taboo, and our parents would never let us have something like that. It was this taboo thing. It was secret knowledge, and anyway, he was a rebel, right? I mean, he did all kinds of things that most of us. I mean, even the rebellious. I mean, I was always in trouble, but I mean, this kid was a step further than me all the time, and nothing seemed to faze him. And anyway, I heard this story after the brother. Like the brother was like, I think he was 15 at the time, and after this event happened, which was relayed to me by his younger brother. That's only it really struck a chord with me. So anyway, he moves away, right? And he's only 15. I mean, so unless the parents kick you out of a house or something like that, it's not common. I mean, you're usually there until you're 18, or a lot of kids are until they're like 20, older. Anyway, so I asked his younger brother, who was my friend, who was my childhood friend, what had happened, and we already knew that he had this book, and maybe this is all bullshit, it's kids being kids and all that stuff, but he did tell me that he was doing some kind of thing in the book, and he despite it being daytime, the room got really, really dark. The house started to shake, and stuff actually shook off of the mantle, and like pictures and stuff like that. And he did hear, as you said, like a really big, a really loud, like a loud, thunderous sound. And after that, I should mention he always had like long hair. He was listening to Metal Slayer and all that stuff. He cut his hair, and he like moved the hell out of his house. So I don't know what anybody else wants to make of that. Maybe it. That said, it is a weird story to make up anyway, so.
Yeah, but the fact that it, again, it details this, this explosion, this sudden, loud noise, and this accompanied with the thing I kept coming across was, like a pressure wave.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like something has entered into this world, and it has done so in a violent fashion.
Well, I wonder.
It's an interesting correlation, nonetheless.
I wonder if it's similar when they leave, because in the case of Darren's story, anyway, after he had heard that thunderous boom, he hasn't been bothered by Zozo since, which was the opposite of other stories I've heard. Once you hear it, it's there, kind of a thing. So I wonder if that, the coming and going, maybe it's a similar sound. That's the passing through the threshold. But it is interesting to note also that there's a permission. There's like demons, from everything I've read and heard and talked to others about, there's an unwritten rule, that's where the Lord's name and all this stuff comes in here. They're basically not allowed to be interfering with us. That's like the agreement, is that they're not allowed to interfere with us. And it's like by reaching out, I guess, to Jesus or God, is like you're telling on them. It's like, hey, look, this guy's not playing by the rules. And I guess there are, punishments for doing so. So that's just a little interesting note to put out there. So moving on to my next story. This has to do with, again, a killing of a family member. This story comes from is a woman by the name of Dia, or Dia. I don't know how you really pronounce that. DIA. So in this case, Zozo had actually attempted to systematically kill this woman's whole family. This story, is about Dia. At this time, she was 12 years old. Her grandmother would tell her all these paranormal stories before she went to bed, which I think is great, by the way. That's the kind of father I would be. If I had a kid, I'd be telling him all kinds of scary stories. But anyway, so that's what she did. She was 12 years old. Her grandmother would tell her all these scary stories, and she ate it up. Eventually, the grandmother mentions that the Ouija, she mentions Ouija boards, and how they worked and all this kind of stuff. And Dia was really excited, and she wanted to try one out. So she asked her grandmother, "Hey, do you have one?" And of course, the grandmother did. So she gives it to Dia, and it was a very old Ouija board. She told her it was really old. She showed her how to use it, but she didn't have a planchette. But she told her, she could use a glass or a coin, which is true. I mean, you could even make a homemade Ouija board. There's lots of stories of people using homemade ones. So the little girl, she takes the Ouija board. She waits till she gets home, and she goes in this dark little room with a lamp, and she puts down a glass to use. This is going to be her planchette, is this glass. As she reaches towards the glass, it shatters. Startled, I mean, most people would probably tuck tail and run, but she was determined. So she takes a coin out of her pocket. And so this is her new planchette. It's this little coin. She starts talking, asking if it was if there was a spirit. She gets a yes. She asks it if it's evil. Again, the answer is yes. When she asks the name, you guessed it. It's Zozo. She asks it if it's an evil spirit, to which it replies yes. I love how honest they are, at least. Right. But anyway, she starts asking these typical questions like what color her clothes are and etc. To which it replies with all the correct answers, and then she asks what's going to happen to her family in the future, and then it tells her it's going to cause her dad to have an accident. And this didn't seem to faze her a whole lot. Maybe she didn't believe in it 100%, but she keeps going on with her questions. She asks her questions. And then, she says, "Okay, I'm done. I want to go now." And this is where one of the things about using Ouija board is you're supposed to end the communication. You don't just, "Okay, I'm done." You leave the board. You're not done yet. You have to say goodbye to this spirit. The spirit has to say goodbye. That's the way it's supposed to work. And when she said she wanted to go, the answer was no. The cursor kept going to no. So she ends up telling it that she's leaving anyway. She puts the board away, just like how it said you're not supposed to do. And later that night when she's sleeping, she awakes to the sound of glass shattering. This turned out to be her bedroom mirror. That's, nothing if not eerie.
Well, in your bedroom that you're sleeping in.
Yeah, that's a warning, right? That's a warning. So anyway, and keeping in mind,
and mirrors being associated with the spirit world.
Oh, for sure.
Since the beginning of, I think reflective glass.
For every time, since the beginning when an Indian looked in it and thought it stole a soul, right?
There you go.
But anyway, this girl grew up with, her grandmother telling her spooky stories, and so she was shaken, but she was tired, and she goes back to sleep. I'm not sure I could do that. So hands off to this 12-year-old girl. But anyway, the next day, she gets news from her neighbor that her dad had been in a car accident. Apparently, the brakes failed, and he had fractured his legs. So, Zozo had told her that he was going to cause an accident for her father. The next day, he has an accident. And even though I just said only his legs were fractured, it is more serious than that. That's just some of the detail. Like, the story wasn't loaded with detail, but I'll explain how it was more serious than that later. Anyway, so his legs are fractured.
And for anybody who can hear in the background, my cat is pacing around me as I'm sitting here with the candles and the Ouija board, and it's crying and pacing back and forth. It's not an entirely unusual thing for him to do, but usually he jumps up on the chair with me and lies down. But right now he's walking around me in circles. Just looking at me and crying. If that means anything, I don't know. But if you can hear it, that's what the sound is.
Well, hopefully it's something stirring. But anyway, so this guy fractures his leg. The day after that, her sister slips on the stairs, smacks her head off of it. She has to go to the hospital. At this point, the girl, Dia, the 12-year-old, she's getting pretty freaked out. And she confides in her grandmother, tells her everything that's happened. And the grandmother suggests that they both try and contact Zozo. So, I mean, it's very different grandmother than I had. But anyway, that was the plan. So the next day, the girl's mom actually heads off to the hospital to visit her daughter and her husband. Both of them are in a hospital now. And she walks. Maybe she doesn't have a car. Anyway, she walks. So the girl and the grandmother, they stick to the plan, and while her mother's gone to the hospital, they try and contact Zozo. At first, when they first make contact, the bedroom window shatters. So, lots of glass breaking here. But despite all this, and the younger girl was really scared. But the grandmother calms her down, and she's determined to make contact with the entity. Perhaps she felt she had some kind of control or something like that. So the grandmother asks Zozo if he was causing the accidents, to which he replied he was. He then said that the mother was next. So he had hurt the father, he had hurt the daughter, and now the mother was next. So the grandmother tells it to leave the family alone, and as always happens, she starts threatening to call in a priest. All the religious threats kind of a thing. And Zozo replies by saying that, fine, he'll leave. He'll get out of there, but only if on the condition that none of the family tried to contact him again. In fact, he said that if anyone had tried to contact him in the future, he can, and I quote, even kill him or her. So it's like, again, with them and their rules, the unwritten rules that they have, he was basically laying a rule that if he agrees to go and one of the family members try to contact him again, then he has legal right to kill them. So
the age old contract theme.
Well, it's always permission, right? So by one of them, going to contact him again, it would be like them giving him permission to do so. The very act of doing so gives him permission. So the grandmother reassures it's Zozo that no one will try to contact him again, and so Zozo puts the planchette to goodbye, and they put the board away. But interestingly enough, while this was taking place, and they heard the story later, I guess when the mother got home, but so while this was happening place, the mother was walking to the hospital. And when she was relaying the story, she said she was almost crushed by what she described as an unbalanced truck. So I don't know if that means it was a truck that was coming around a bend, kind of tipsy-turvy or whatever, but she described it as an unbalanced truck. But anyways, she said she was almost crushed by it, but she said it was as if somebody helped her and stopped the truck, like pulled her out of the way or something like that. But it wasn't like a physical entity. It was something she couldn't put her finger on that had saved her from getting crushed by that truck. It was one of those things that I guess she couldn't really describe it in a way that makes sense, but she had this really big sensation, and she didn't really know that they were, doing the Ouija board. I don't think when they were gone anyway. But unfortunately, with this story, her father was in much more serious condition than there's just the fractured legs, and he died some days later. So I don't know if there was internal injuries as well, or if it was an infection or something of that nature. But there you have it, a tale of somebody using a Ouija board and somebody dying as a result. So that is a very stern warning to the rest of us. Something that I think now would be a good time to bring up, because as I'm just like you guys. I like to dig where I'm not supposed to be digging. Ryan too. one of the things about using a Ouija board, I mean, a Ouija board is not magic. It's not a magic board. You could take a cardboard box and you could use a Sharpie. You could make your own Ouija board. You could use a glass for your planchette. It'll work the same. The reason why it works, and there's different schools of thought on this. There is some truth to, I forget what it's called, like an idiomatic result. I can't remember the term, but scientists have done studies on it, and basically, your unconscious mind, while your fingers are on the planchette, will actually move at places. It's just like your hand will move. If you held your hand out, it will make little movements on its own. It's just your muscles.
Little micro movements. This is the same scientific rationale that is used for the for pendulums as well.
Yes. So I mean, there is truth to that. I'm not saying that every time somebody uses a Ouija board that it's I mean, it's very, very possible that it's a combination of your natural body movement and your subconscious mind. But there have been many, many, many stories of how real things do and did happen and spell out really intelligent and things that it shouldn't know, and all kinds of tragedies happen as a result. And the thing people need to understand, and it's not just Ouija boards, this is true for tarot cards, it's true for, as you said, holding a pendulum, it's true for all sorts of divination.
All forms of divination.
Yeah, they're just tools. When you use this tool and you're trying to make contact with that other side, you're opening that door and giving permission for the entities on that other door to communicate with you. And the important thing to note here is that by giving permission, it's just like when people get possessed, they say they don't just get possessed. Somewhere in their head, they have to give permission for the demon to enter their body. And whether they get permission by lying to them, by promising them things that they don't intend to give them,
or just wearing them down,
wearing them
finally
down.
Are, I'm defeated, fine, just take me, whatever.
But the end result is always the same, is that you have to give permission. What people don't realize is that by using any sort of divination, you're opening the possibility, you're giving permission. In fact, you're asking for other entities to communicate with you. That's what you're doing. And by the act of doing that, you're giving permission. So that is...
And especially in the case of forms of divination like the Ouija board, you're asking a spirit, come in, take control of my hands and guide them to the letters on this board, and if that's what if that's how you're beginning your contact with an entity, you're telling it, come on in, take control of my hands, come on in. And if we're talking an evil spirit or demon or whatever you want to call it, let's face it, it's not gonna stop at the end of your wrist, it's or at your shoulders or whatever. It's coming in, and whether you had intended to allow it, just the control of your hands or your arms or the guidance of those parts of your body. The fact remains is that you have invited a spirit in to take, you're asking it to take limited control. But I don't know if it works like that. I really don't think so.
No, permission is...
That's, it's once it's given, you can't invite a vampire only into your foyer, just you can come in, but only this room, it never works like that in the lore.
No, permission is permission.
Yeah.
And I mean, demons, as we know, they're tricksters, they're liars. They do what they can to get what they want. So in the case of this, give an inch, take a mile. That is how they always are. And never don't forget that according to a lot of people who studied this, demons want in this world. Their physical bodies does not resonate at a frequency that can exist here, but they can exist here through you as your body your body being the vessel. So if they can possess you, they can exist here, and that is why they do it. Besides the fact that they like to torment and hurt and maim, that is their way. So I do have another story with Zozo. I actually read as recent as today. Now this was it was a book, I should say. So I'm obviously not gonna go into crazy detail, but it was a book that read like a blog, and it was ironically on a blog. So, however you want to look at it like that. But anyway, there was a guy. His name I think was Alex, and he had a handful of friends. Girlfriend, another girl, and she was dating some other guy. They hung out with and some other guy, and like a lot of us, they were into the scary stuff. I mean, they would group up and go to these haunted houses and try to capture stuff on their camera and stuff like that. And eventually, like it always does, it leads back to a Ouija board, right? And so they get this Ouija board, and this story actually takes place over months of use, where months of use where it would go further and further and further. And in this story is probably the best example I read where Zozo was, sexually explicit with a female. And I believe the girl's name was Teresa. Anyway, he wouldn't he wouldn't come out and say why, because Zozo would call her a slut, right? He wouldn't come out and say why. Apparently there was some real reason why, something she must have done that why the entity knew that. But Zozo really got turned on by this, right? Like, I mean, that's what he liked. So he was constantly at her, wanting her to do sexual favors, get on to bed and, do this. Do you feel me? And I mean, there was all these different times where, they would go so far. Like maybe she'd get on the bed and just wait for something, and she'd feel him kind of put pressure on her hand, or different like little, I guess, subtle things like that. Sometimes it would escalate. There was one time where she was feeling like she was getting jabbed in the leg with something, and nobody kind of believed her, and it continued to happen until they put the board away. And when she went to the bathroom, she came out and showed everybody she had 3 fresh, jab wounds into her leg that formed like a triangle. So a lot of these different things had happened over the months, and at some point, it actually did possess both of the girls. But what was interesting was that at the end of it, I mean, this is months after the whole escapade, the guy who owned a Ouija board had decided to leave. He wanted to get away because they were all just really spooked out. And as much as it seemed to prey on the women, the girls were very. It's like every next day after this happened, it was like they wanted to go back at it. It was like they were addicted to it. They needed to. They needed more. They needed to see where it was going to go. And the guy just. He wanted out, and I mean, it got to the point, it was his Ouija board, but every time they started, it would actually tell him, Alex, get out, or Alex, go away. And, so he decided to leave. He was going to he took the Ouija board with him, and as he put it, on his drive, it felt like he had another passenger with him, this dark passenger. And eventually he gets over this bridge, and he decides that he's going to throw this thing over the bridge. You know, he didn't want it anymore. And he threw it over the bridge, and immediately after doing so, his girlfriend texted him, and she asked him if he had gotten rid of it. And he said it was as if, you know, she or the Zozo, for that matter, could see him, you know, like when he had to board with him, it was like it was spying on him. And it's like she knew where it was, although she wasn't really herself. It's like she knew. And with that, he had to go down and he burned it. So, I mean, it really does have a lingering effect where a lot of these stories, you know, it's not one session, it's not two sessions, it opens a door that sticks with you long after it's, you know, you think it's been closed. And as you'll see with a lot of people who become possessed, it's not usually right away. It's like a chipping away effect. That
it's very much a gradual taking over. I guess, and I've never thought of it like this, but I mean, it's kind of like an infection. You know, it's something that kind of gets into you, and it grows. It gets worse and worse over time, and I mean, in any classic possession tale, you know, the person's physical appearance and their mental health it constantly degrades, you know, day after day, week after week, until they're pretty much unrecognizable. I mean, really, you only need to look up the photos of Annalise, you know,
oh hell yeah.
to really get a sense of how grotesque some of this. You know, concerning Zozo, I found it very interesting that that you know that name you know pops up all throughout history, and one of I can't remember the language now, but it's widely considered to be one of the oldest languages on the planet. Zozo actually means like blackbird, and it's interesting that, you know, if you look for images, or if you know, several stories I read of people who claim to have, you know, actually seen an apparition of Zozo. It's been, you know, and I say he, even though, you know, I guess I should say it, because Zozo, in several different places that I've read now, it sometimes it interchanges, claiming to be male, claiming to be female, but either way, there's always this bird imagery that seems to accompany his images, and I can't help but think of kind of like an Egyptian god in a way, like the what is it, the ibis, you know, the bird with a bird head and the body of a man.
Well, ironically enough, I have come across where they said Zozo in some cultures is a god, refers to a certain god. I mean, it is really thrown around a lot of places. I've heard Aleister Crowley claim that Zozo meant 666. Some people say that Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin used a Zozo, like a Zozo like symbol on one of their albums.
Yeah, it was Zozo, or perhaps it was even Zoso.
Yeah, I think that's what it was.
Yeah, and you know, I guess it's at this point, you know, it bears to mention that you know, there's a whole menagerie of Z lettered names from, you know, I've seen Zozo, Zoso, Zito, Zam, Zaza, Zara. You know, like there's a whole, you know, either there's a whole pantheon of Z lettered beings, or you know, I guess one of the things that pops up in a lot of these different types of divination tools is that, you know, when messages are coming across from the spirit world, It's very easy for things to become jumbled, mixed up, and whether the being is intentionally, altering its name, or whether that matters or not. I guess it's just as likely that it's, on the part of the human brain as it's receiving this message, the way it's decoded, it can come out, Zito, Zozo, Zos, So, Zaza. It's not beyond the realm of possibility when, we're talking about interdimensional communication,
But it is interesting that it's always a Z, and
Yeah,
that
well, that's the, and again, that, we brought up the idea that, Z was the evil, mirror of the letter S, and again, we have this link with mirrors, and mirrors have long been a source of, of stories for all kinds of different types of spiritualism. So the links of the Zozo entity, and, again, like you said, I've come across numerous, accounts of Zozo, not being a demon, but, a god. And I guess, at this point, we're playing on semantics, really. I mean, a demon to one religion could be a god to another. I'm sure there's not many, Christians that would look at Kali, the Kali worshippers, and say, oh yeah, there's a god.
well,
They,
it's
you know,
interesting to point out actually, in religion like Christianity itself, they forbid using any form of divination.
Yes,
It's
yes.
very, very
Any
frowned upon.
contact with the spirit. Well, I guess the main point there being is that, in the Christian mythos, when somebody dies, their spirit is immediately whisked away to either heaven or hell, right? Or I guess purgatory as well. That's in there somewhere. But either way, it's whisked away to a realm that human beings cannot have any contact with. So anytime you have contact with a spirit, it's not the spirit of a human. It's the spirit of something else, because all humans find their way immediately to, some kind of unreachable afterlife, a place where, living human beings, where our minds and our sight cannot penetrate. So if you're talking to a spirit, if you're talking to, your dead grandmother, it's something masquerading as your dead grandmother.
Yeah, indeed. In fact, if half the stories we read on Ouija boards, which are almost always negative, actually, I can't recall a positive one. If any of those are true, then you're almost guaranteed to be talking with a demon of some sort.
And I guess, you know what, that's a good point that you make, because I mean, there are very few phenomenon that, in the world of the supernatural, the paranormal, that is ubiquitously associated with negativity. I mean, there's all kinds of people that say that they've seen, will-o-wisps, and some say they're evil and some say they're good. People have seen little people or fairies, and some say they're good and some say they're evil. But, you're very, if somebody out there has a story about a Ouija board rattling off the lotto numbers to them, I'd be happy to hear it. But, that's a good point. There's not a single story that says, my daughter went missing. I
I
pulled the
found her with.
Ouija board.
Yeah.
I pulled out the Ouija board and it gave me an address, or I lost my wallet, or whipped out the Ouija board. But in terms of other paranormal, topics, whether it be ghosts or, I mean, there's, even if we're talking, strange hairy humanoids. There's stories of even out of the David Pallades 411 of little girl said that she was snuggled up with a dog man all night long in a cave.
I remember that story.
And I mean that's a one of the very bizarre extreme stories. But there it is. There's one.
Well,
It's more than I've ever come across with a Ouija board. So I think that in its own is interesting.
oh, for sure. And while on the topic of, because as far as I'm concerned, there's probably no safe way to use a Ouija board. In fact,
Oh yeah, tell me now while I got one out.
you knew before you went, as you put it, you were already damned.
Yeah, I was damned long before today.
Yeah, this is just, it's not going to make a difference. It's like peeing in a warm wading pool, right? It's already warm. It's not really going to help. It's just going to be a little grosser. So, Ryan, I just thought of this, just because you have always had, I mean, you've delved into the dark places. And
As far as I could go.
As far as you could go. So when people often have this list of things that you can do to protect yourself when using a Ouija board, and they often say, you take this certain kind of salt or whatever, you make a circle around yourself. But I've also heard the opposite be true, that by doing so, you're trapping yourself in there with it.
Yeah.
So I mean, is that what you would, take? Like, what would you, if you had to lean a certain way, what would your thought on that be?
Well, the salt thing, again, it's salt represents the purity. It's the salt of the earth, the purity, and there's something about that evil spirits apparently, and I mean, you can dig in almost any mythology anywhere, and you'll find that salt is used in all kinds of rituals, right down to very basic, people throwing salt over their shoulder, right? As a for those who are into what we call superstitions, throwing salt over one's shoulder said to get rid of bad luck. But if personally, if I was going to use something like that, and I guess I'm a paranormal slut. I never use protection. Salt, creating a salt circle around yourself before you start is only going to stop any kind of contact that you could possibly have, because said spirit couldn't infiltrate. But creating a salt circle after, if you're using the Ouija board and a friend of yours comes up and creates a circle of salt around you, you're creating a situation where you have, I'm not going to call it a ghost trap, but you've created an impassable barrier. So if there's something there, it can't get out unless it rides you across the circle, or you break the circle.
And let's not forget that if the circle doesn't actually block them, all it's going to do is piss them off.
Well, yeah, and again, it's one of these things. What are these entities? Sure, Christianity has labeled every god and patron spirit of every other religion as a demon, and I mean it could very well be that all the old Babylonian gods and all the old Assyrian gods and all the different pagan deities and patron spirits are all evil. The majority of them all certainly seem to have a dark side, but I would argue that Old Testament God had a bit of a temper himself.
Oh, yeah, and not to mention,
Sodom and Gomorrah and
an ego. You don't worship me, and I'm going to wipe you out, right?
Well, and I guess if we're going to look at it from that, from that Christian centric view, nowhere does he ever say there are no other gods. He says, don't worship these other gods. right?
Well, yeah, actually,
Which is
yeah.
an admission of their existence. So I mean, here, here we have the ultimate divine being, just a little slip of the tongue here, and bam, proves once and for all, if you're an absolute believer in the Word of God, the Bible. It's right there. Don't worship other gods, which means there have to be other gods out there to worship.
Well, for that matter, the Old Testament, and within the last year, I've actually gone through and read quite a bit of it. In the old one, God came across as very manipulative as well as jealous. If anyone worshipped another god, angry when they did, vengeful, and egocentric in that everybody had to worship and give sacrifices to him. Now, with that said, before everybody decides to put me up on a cross, I do believe in God. I just think, and I do, worship God. I'm just saying that the Old Testament, my belief is that the Bible of what it is today is a really mixed and screwed up version of the original word back then. Even way back when it happened, was mankind's perception and point of view, which is going to reflect their point in time. It's kind of like when someone passes a rumor. By the time it gets all the way around, it's not quite the same as it was when it started.
Yeah, what was that game called? Telephone.
Yeah.
So we've been playing a game of telephone for the last 2,000 years. Again, there's something bound to be lost in the translation.
Well, we even know for a fact that there's been stuff ripped out of it and put in it, and it really isn't what it was in the beginning. But even in the beginning, it was still man's perception. So this whole the Bible is the word of God. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna stop right there because the religious crazies are gonna jump on me.
Well, the fact that we have, the most popular version, and there's the kicker, right? Is that there's different versions. So whenever you have a book with several versions, it certainly does leave things open to interpretation. But as far as spiritual protection comes in, I've long played with symbols, both both holy and unholy, we'll say, and all the different we'll say arts that go along with it, the chanting, the rites, the candles. I actually have an array of candles in front of me right now. I think the most important thing to always remember is that it is an individual's will. It's the human spirit. There is nothing more powerful in your life than you. In my personal opinion, in all the years that I've been playing with the occult and religion, I've done the whole spectrum. I really have come away with a sense that the most powerful force in your own personal world is your own personal will, your own personal spiritual power. And I believe that depending upon other beings weakens us in a way. And I'm very much of the mind that if I'm being assaulted by an unseen entity, if I'm experiencing some sort of distress from a spirit, the only name that I'm going to use to drive it out is my own. By my own divinity as a sovereign thinking being, get the fuck out of here. And if you have that force of will, and I guess it really does, it circle back to the idea of permission. We in a lot of cases where people are victimized by other people, you give them the permission to victimize you. You put yourself in that position and you allow it to happen. and that so many human atrocities all throughout history were allowed to happen because we have collectively decided that that's okay. Whether it be a political party in Germany, or it be an individual or a couple in a dysfunctional abusive relationship, those people are agreeing to let that happen. And I think the same goes in spiritual matters. If there's something that is ailing you, and I mean, like I've said, I've done my best to contact the brightest and the darkest of the spirit world in an attempt to understand the spirit world from my own point of view. And I mean, you can't, you don't know what warm is unless you've been cold. You don't know what you can't tell light from dark unless you've experienced both. And again, that's just my opinion, but in all my years, and I will say I have had some pretty harrowing personal experiences that I'm not going to get into right now, or probably ever,
Unless I put you on the spot again. Right?
unless you put me on the spot again. Yeah. But I think the thing to take away from it is that, you choose as a sovereign, intelligent thinking being with your own spiritual power to say, all right, I want you to take control of my hands and spell words on a board, or to pick out certain tarot cards. And then when you're done, it's, you have to use that same force of will to say, all right, I'm done. It's time for you to leave. And, I think that that's something that is overlooked far too often when we talk about spiritualism and the paranormal.
Well,
And, you get people, I think this is again, it's one of those, we see the demification of extraterrestrials these days. A lot of people, especially religious people, believe that extraterrestrials represent the new age, the modern era of demonic infiltration. And they like to point to instances where people have, invoked the name of Jesus Christ to drive these entities away. And if I'm not saying that that the gray, for instance, because that's the one that pops up the most, the gray is a physical being or a spiritual being. I really don't know. And if you were in a situation with a gray and you said, by the power of Christ compels you, and the thing went away, you may indeed think that the power of Christ did compel it, or did the power of Christ compel you? Did that thought, did those words fortify your own personal being? Right? Is that what And all my research and all my studies of the occult, I came away with the distinct impression that ritual, occult ritual or religious ritual, which are really inseparable. I mean, when comes down to brass tacks, ritual is a ritual is a ritual, whether you're taking communion or sacrificing a little furry animal on a pentagram. It's something that you're doing, to get attention of a greater being, or to come in contact with a spiritual entity. But I think it's not that any of those things are important. The circle, the blood, none of that matters. It's the frame of mind that it puts you in. Is that it's an experience that is a physical experience that is resonating with your own internal spiritual experience, and you use that to fortify your own mind and fortify your fortify your own personal spirit, which I think the mind and the spirit, they're inseparable. That's the mind fuels the spirit.
all right. So if I could just weigh in for a minute, because I feel like this is going to be a very unpopular opinion. Just for the record, I don't share that opinion exactly. I really do think, I'm not naive enough to think that there's not more powerful spirits out there than I. I definitely, and again, I'm not poo-pooing your side of it either.
No. So,
But
feel free to have an opinion.
yeah. So again, like I'm not poo-pooing it, but just in my own thoughts, I really do think, even dealing with demons and stuff like that. I mean, I am not naive enough to think that I'm more powerful than it. That's why they're dangerous to get involved with to begin with. And I really do think that, well, I do believe in God and Jesus. I also think that by when you call on them, I think I'm going to harken back to what I said earlier, is that you're drawing attention to the fact that, the demons aren't supposed to be interacting with you at all. They know they're breaking the rules, and they're doing it under, almost like when God's not looking, kind of a thing. And when you call out,
When the omnipotent, all-knowing, all-seeing God isn't looking.
well, you got a lot to do, right? So I think.
Well, the one thing I will point out is that, if these beings were so all-powerful, they wouldn't have to interact with us in order to come into the world. Obviously there's something there, and at the same time, in every case where these things are cast out, or in the majority of the cases where evil spirits are quote unquote casted out, it's an angel doesn't show up and just wave its hand and boom, they're gone. The intervention of another human is required.
It is, but as someone who can channel in the correct way, not unlike someone who can do a ritual, can do it in the right way. For me, I mean, I can personally say that I've had, I guess, good help in a way that I can't explain. And I know there's other people like that too, and maybe that's why I'm not, that's why I can look at it in this way. But I know that in the big scheme of things, I'm just a small, I'm not quite, up there enough as with a lot of these different entities. I just, I mean, we're just little dots on this little tiny blue planet. I mean, there's much, much more powerful things out there than us humans and our human spirits.
Oh, most certainly.
So
I very much believe that there are,
I think when it comes
many beings more powerful than me now.
Well, we have to die someday. Hopefully we'll keep evolving, spiritually and getting to be like the bigger fish. But I think again, like when it comes to our involvement, why the demons can't just come here. They're in a different dimension. They can't exist here at the frequency that they vibrate at, and the only way to do so is to possess us. But I mean, at that same, on that same wave of thought, I mean, we're not powerful enough to communicate and possess them, right? We could never do that, but they could possess us. I mean, that to me shows that they have a much stronger will, I guess is the way to put it. And the only ones that we seem to be able to consistently go to drive them out are the ones higher than us, which, people...
Wouldn't that be an interesting concept, eh? A man possessing a demon.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean,
perhaps I'll give that a try someday.
Well, you let me know how it turns out.
I'll keep a record of the experience.
You'll be like Hermes on Futurama. Thank you. It was cold down there on the floor, right? With the brain slug.
Yeah.
So, Ryan, before we clue this up, I mean, did anything actually happen with your Ouija board?
My arm is absolutely exhausted from holding. I'm holding my arm up, so the only thing that's supporting it is my shoulder, and it is burning and aching. And I'll tell you right now that this planchette hasn't moved an inch that I haven't moved it. I will say, however, that my cat was extremely curious about it, and for a moment there, I thought I was going to have the potential for a house fire because he was trying to jump up on the table filled with candles here. But other than that,
he showed about as much interest as my cat does when I put a box on the floor.
yeah, there's and I've gotten nothing but dead silence from this thing. So, thank you, William Fueled, for your talking board set, registered U.S. Patent Office. And Hasbro for their contribution, but not a damn thing on this side.
Yet. We know these.
You know.
You'll probably call me tomorrow and say, "Man, the fucking thing was flying around the room." Right. So
and if it does, I'll do my best to document the experience for for posterity and for the enjoyment of everyone out there. As I mean, as irreverently as I approach many things, I mean I can't help that. That's just the theme of my life, irreverence. But I really do strongly believe in the existence of the paranormal. Personally, I've proven it to myself. But I guess like so many things in this world, I've found way more gray area than I ever have black and white. And
I guess one thing to say about the paranormal, though, Ryan, is that we know it exists. We've had a handful of experiences, but we're not dumb enough to think we can go out once a week and capture it on video, like so many ghost shows on TV. Because let's face it, it's a rare thing. I mean, to expect that you could. So I mean, they must have people behind every wall for every episode. Did you hear that? Oh my God! Once for yes, two for no. It's just every episode, right? So I mean, I love the paranormal, but that's ridiculous.
They never stick the camera out in the alley to see the homeless guy knocking on the wall.
No, they're like, we have no budget, so we're gonna get a camera with night vision, and every episode is gonna look the same, but it'll look legitimate because we need to be in the dark, right? So, whatever. I mean, if that floats your boat, but yeah, we're probably not gonna be able to capture that kind of a thing on a camera for you guys, but we will be able to tell your stories. So, if you have any paranormal or effed up story of your own, we'd like to hear it. You can go to our official website at effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. Go to submissions, fill out the form, send it to me. It'll probably get on the website, possibly in a podcast. And with that said, I hope you guys did enjoy our Halloween podcast. We would also like to hear your stories that you've had with Ouija boards, if you have any. With that said, happy Halloween. This is Will Pender signing out.
And again, from myself, thank you very much, everyone, for listening. If I offended anybody out there, I apologize for having an opinion. But there it is. It may not be popular opinion, but it's the one that I have. And I just want to thank you all so very much for listening tonight. Good night.
You won't be haunted by people, Ryan. You'll be haunted by our fan base. Anyway, good night, people.